My name is Tremaine Sails-Dunbar. I'm a PhD student at the University of South Carolina, fourth year.
Can you tell me about your mental health journey?
I had my first episode when I was 21, and I was diagnosed as bipolar, I believe one, the severe one. And then I basically was homeless for about 6 months, and I got into a Bible college and was able to use education as a coping mechanism. I then went on to do a master's degree, and at the end of my master's degree, I had another episode which caused me to be homeless, and they changed my diagnosis to schizophrenia. And then after that episode, I was also incarcerated, and then I got out of jail, and then I applied to PhD programs and was diagnosed as schizoaffective, and they changed my medication, and I think that was really the turning point where I felt like things were going better in terms of my mental health, in terms of my emotional well-being, and so forth. So that's a short synopsis of pretty much what I've been through.
Well, what is it like now going to college and trying to learn more about helping mental health?
I actually look at like social and environmental factors that influence health. So, things like weathering and how, being LGBTQ or being African American or being disabled, how they, not necessarily disabled in the sense of mental illness, but disabled like physical disabilities and so forth, how that can exacerbate the mental health and cause an allostatic load to be present. And so I look at those factors, and so it's kind of helped me it's giving me a voice, to where I can say that I am a lived experience scholar. I've lived this, and so I'm trying to reduce from a social determinant standpoint the factors that influence negative mental health. And so I grew up in poverty. I grew up in I had a rough life, and so all of those factors I believe played into part of me having my first episode. And so, I'm just trying to help those who have, those particular conditions to be able to rise above and not have those environmental and social influences that can, ultimately lead to, some severe mental illness. So it's a bit empowering, and at the same time, it's very humbling to be able to do something like this. So.
Do you think talking to other people with lived experiences help your own process?
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, because it's a community, like being with One Mind, and just being around, other people such as yourself, such as Uma, such as Alex, and then I have colleagues in other academic spaces as well who are lived experience. It's just like it's great, man, to see that people are putting forward their valleys, if you will, in the sense of biblical. They say the Bible says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," and so people are walking through this valley, and they're coming out with a righteous sort of hope in a better tomorrow, and they're using whatever skills they have, such as you using this platform or other people using, their academic articles or other people using, mental health in the workplace and being practitioners. And so everybody collectively, I think, does, a great deal of justice towards helping people with mental illness. And so, for me, just to be around those people is just like, it's a new world. Like growing up as an African American male, I really didn't understand what career opportunities were before me. I had no idea what a sociologist was, or what a anthropologist was, or what a psychologist was. The only thing I knew to go to college for was for business. And so to see that there are so many careers and professions where people are making a living for themselves and people are making a better life for themselves and being able to provide for their families while at the same time talking about mental illness is great stuff, man. And it just motivates me to do the best that I can.
And you touched on One Mind, which we're both a part of the community advisory network. Do you think stuff like that with amplifying voices is going to help for future generations?
Yeah, I do. I think that anytime you have an organization that was founded by a person with lived experience and they're changing the narrative, changing the sort of, yeah, the narrative around mental illness, and in a public space, and then in a large and impactful way. I think that in and of itself, the passion behind it, as well as the intentionality of selecting people across the gamut with lived experience. I feel that it lends itself to success. I feel that it will naturally have longevity because of the heart behind the work. You know what I mean? And that it's so intentional, and it's so I guess my ministerial stuff is coming out, but it's God breathed and stuff like that. When it has the essence of the divine in it, in terms of loving your neighbor, loving your God, loving the most vulnerable, and then having a mind such as Brandon behind it. I can't see anything but success. So.
You brought up faith. How important is faith as a treatment?
Yeah. It's interesting because for some people, they use it's like you can become hyper religious,
Yeah.
where your religiosity or your spiritual inclinations or your spiritual fervor causes you to go deeper into psychosis, but if you have a grounding in faith and you have a grounding in reality, that is, you understand that that there's a difference between psychosis and between a regular life. There's a difference between hearing voices and having a disturbed mood, and between your normal life. If you can parse apart the differences between those, and you can use your faith as something that will allow you to live in that reality, then that way I believe you can have, faith for me in particular has been just instrumental. And even when I was in psychosis, I still prayed. I still, prayed to God that, all the actions that I was making, whether they were errant or whether they were, just aloof or whatever, I still was praying to God and hoping that everything that I did was in line with what He wanted me to do. And it wasn't until after I came out of psychosis that I realized that I was actually in psychosis, but I still saw in retrospect that God was carrying me through. And so, I believe that connection with the divine is important, man, because it helps you, appreciate everything around you. It helps you appreciate the simple things in life of just being sane. I had a situation where I was talking with a colleague of mine, and he was talking about something called the Wounded Warrior Complex, and I think it was created by Carl Jung, or Young, however you say it. And he was saying that people with mental illnesses, particularly in the psychology profession, psychiatric profession, psychologists, clinical psychologists, counseling psychologists, and so forth, a large portion of them either have direct experience with mental illness or they know someone with mental illness. And because of this, they, decided to go into that career field. And so it's kind of the same thing with me. It's that, I'm a wounded healer. and that, because I have my wounds and mental illness, I use my faith in God and my belief that we are all equal, we are all loving, we are all righteous, at the very root of who we are, that if we can give up of ourselves something more than what we are and believe in a higher power, that we can make the world a better place. So this wounded healer thing is really something that I've been thinking about recently, and I'm hoping that we can have more of that in these spaces.
How has schooling helped your confidence level?
It it's increased. It's increased. It's increased. I'm still working on that. Because it's like coming from where I came from. It's hard not to think like um you're not good enough, or maybe I'll have an episode again, and then everything I've worked for will just disappear and vanish. But at the root of it, is um W.E. Du Bois talks about being the only African American male at Harvard in the late 19th century, and they were asking them like, what's your experience? What was it like? Being in that space, and still trying to get your education. And W.E. Du Bois said, well, it was the cost of knowledge. And so the cost of knowledge, or the cost of, if you superimpose that into the realm of social justice and into the realm of actually trying to make the world a better place, it's just a price you have to pay. And so the insecurities, the infallibility, the everything, all of those work together, to create, a very compelling narrative. But at the end of the day, it's just a price to pay to make the world a better place. And so it's like the Bible says, offer yourself as a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable and pleasing unto God. And so that's kind of what I've done, and kind of what I hope to do.
What do you do to help your own mental health?
Yeah, I work out. Yeah, I work out every 6 days a week. I also I pray. I meditate. Uh, uh, Communities such as speaking with you, Mike. This is a form of therapy. Talking with Alex, my good pal from HBRS, Alex Sheehan. Just being around other people that can relate to what I've experienced, and so just building that community of people that, regardless if I do go into psychosis, or if I do have a retrogression into, a particular psychotic state, I will have built, this community of people that will love me for who I am, and respect me and believe in me for who I am. And so just building that community, I think, is important. My dad, he's very important to me. He helps me, in terms of just life advice and everything. And, in the African American community, mental health is kind of taboo. So he doesn't necessarily understand the full gamut of what I'm going through. But, just having him there as a presence, is very helpful too.
I like that you said that because I take, for bipolar disorder too, I take uh, medicine and therapist, psychiatrist. But one of the things that helped me the most is my family, having a support system. Do you think a strong support system helps you?
Yeah, I do, and I also take meds. I forgot to mention that, but meds are like actually like the most important thing.
Right. Yeah, I
But
agree. Yes.
yeah, gotta have the gotta have your shots and gotta have your pills. But yeah, family is key, because they were there when you entered the world. They were there when you're leaving the world. They're going to be there when you're leaving the world. They're going to be the people at your funeral. They're going to be the people there when you get married, when you have kids, and so forth. And so, having just family, family is just so critical. And though they may not understand it fully, just them being there, and being who they are, and being loving and being caring and being kind, I think it just speaks volumes to, actually being able to overcome, mental health diagnoses. So,
What would you say to anyone going through a tough time?
yeah, so I'm actually writing a book, and I hope to have it published hopefully by the end of the year. But the last line of my book, I say to those who have made it through the night, reach back into the darkness and pull others closer towards the light. And so it's just about, once again, that healer complex, or wounded healers, whatever you call it, realizing that your life as a person with mental illness is just going to allow you to be able to love more deeply and to see humanity more deeply. Whether it's LGBTQ people, whether it's minorities, whether it's immigrants, whether it's women, whether it's people with physical disabilities, whether it's refugees, people from all over the world and all over the country, and people from all walks of life, are in need of love. And they have their own challenges. They have their own mental illness, if you will. And when I say mental illness in that sense, I'm talking about they have their own trials and tribulations, just as we have our mental illnesses. And so, because everyone in the world is dealing with something, everyone in the world is dealing with something challenging, if we can realize that our mental illness, has dehumanized us in a sense internally, and that because of this, we can see when other people are being dehumanized by things both external and internal, then we can see that all the world needs is love. All the world needs is people to care about one another and to treat each other right. And because we have this mental illness, allows us to see that more clearly, I believe, than, a lot of other people. And so, yeah, I just believe that, it's all about love, man. And it's all about, taking your mental illness, taking your story, and trying to make the world a better place and becoming a victor and not a victim.
Can you tell me about the book?
Yeah, so it's about my life. I talk about growing up, in poverty, in West Tennessee, and then bouncing back in between and forth my mom and my dad's house. And then I went to college. I was playing basketball, but I wasn't like I was on a practice team, but I had hopes of being on like the regular team. You know what I'm saying? I had hopes of gaining some minutes and actually, living out my dream of being Kobe Bryant. And so, unfortunately, I got into marijuana and drinking, even though I grew up in a very religious household. And I think that kind of initiated some of my mental decline. And I then had my first episode at 21, was homeless. I was sleeping in a car. Actually, my mom, she has a mental illness. She got hers from when she was in her second tour in Kuwait. I believe when she came back from Kuwait, she was just like, everything was just weird with her. And she was just short. She wasn't as embracing. She wasn't as warm as she was in the past. And so, believe it or not, Mike, for 6 months when I had my first episode, I slept in the car with my mom. She was in the back seat. I was in the front seat, and we slept in the car for 6 months. And then I had a moment where it was all divinely ordained, I would really say. But I went to a halfway house and called Right Road Ministries, and I was staying outside of there, and I looked into the night sky, and it was just so beautiful and serene in Middle Tennessee. We weren't in the city, so you could really see the stars, really see the moon. And then at that moment, I gave my life to Christ, and I made the vow to God. I said, God, if you change my life, I'll give it to you. And so I ended up going to Bible college. They wrote me a scholarship to attend. And it was just, I had my lows and my highs ever since then. But, for the most part, it has been an upward trajectory for my life. And I'm thankful that, God has allowed me to do so. But, some of the stuff that, I talk about is that, like when I had my first episode, I went to the hospital, and, they just released me. They kept me for 3 days, and I think they may have told me that I had bipolar. I can't really recall, but I just remember that my stay was so short that I didn't really get any help. It was just like we send him here because he's socially aberrant, or he's psychotic. And then 3 days later, I was out. I was homeless. I was on the streets with a mental illness. And if it had not been for God's hand in my life, then I very well this conversation can be wouldn't be happening, and I very well could be on the streets right now, talking to myself, or you know, um, living in a halfway house or a homeless shelter, vying for my humanity. So I try to situate the book in terms of believing in God and believing in yourself and believing that you're worthy of life, and just using your story as a mechanism to help forward what we're both trying to fight for, is a change in mental health reform.
Where do you want to see your mission in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, man. Uh, I mean, I hope to, you know, see the world more clearly. I haven't really developed my terms of my social agenda, if you will, of what I want the world to be like. I've only sort of envisioned where I want to be so that I can change the world, if that makes sense. So, in 3 to 5 years, I hope to be, an assistant professor at, or an associate professor at, some university researching mental health, homelessness, criminality among black men, and really changing the narrative about them. I hope to, in 5 years, actually, 5 to 6 years, I hope to open up a mental health think tank, and just use grant funding, because I have pretty good experience with writing grants, but to use grant funding to just do all types of different kind of mental health stuff. You know what I mean? Like create a halfway house or home, but or homeless shelter, but have education as the center of it. So, when people come into the home, they're encouraged to, get a degree so that they, have a better opportunity at living a exceptional life. I hope to, influence policy through that think tank, and just do a lot of stuff in that regard. But my main goal, I have a lot of goals, but my main goal is to, you know, become an assistant professor and to publish research in that capacity. And then if God is willing, and if he is so favorable upon me, then I would, try to open up my think tank, and speak widely, to different audiences, spread the news about mental health, reduce the stigma, because there is still a stigma, especially with severe mental illness. Like, I feel like in recent years, it's become acceptable to talk about anxiety and depression, and people saying, "Oh, I have anxiety," or "I have depression," or "I have something else," and which is great, in terms of us changing the narrative about mental illness. But as soon as you bring up bipolar or schizophrenia or schizoaffective or personality disorder, then it's just like a completely different story. So if we can change, if I can change how we talk about people with severe mental illnesses, then that will be, I suppose, my 5 year goal, possibly even a lifetime goal. It may take a
Right.
lifetime for me to do this. So